I think the first customer that the fire chief or the leadership needs to be worrying about is those that are a part of the mission. They're the first customers. They're the first people they should be caring about. And then we should be caring about the public, because if you take care of your people, they're going to do a really good job taking care of the customer, period. But when we take care of the customer and we alienate the people within the organization, they're the ones giving the service. And guess what? You're going to have unhappy customers, because the people that are doing the service are going to be very unhappy.
Okay, Relentless Rejects podcast. Thank you for tuning in for another great episode. This is actually episode 30. We are flying through the year. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep up this momentum, but we've been trying to do one every week. There's actually even been a few double headers at the request of very close friends of mine. But this episode is something that I am going to try to learn as much as I can from, because my guest today is Rob Fisher, and if you are trying to say that name sounds familiar, I'm not exactly sure. He's known for, well, making famous the phrase 10 pounds of pressure 100% of the time. And if you're like, oh, light bulb, then that's him. And he may go down the route of explaining that he didn't come up with it, but he's utilized it so much, that's kind of what he's known for now. But as you all know, I don't read a bio. I don't read the story of the person that's sitting in front of me. So without further ado, retired Battalion Chief Rob Fisher. How you doing?
Hey, Preston. It's good to be on. I'm doing great.
I want to thank you for making the time, because I made the mistake of asking you of what you're involved in and what events you got coming up, and I got probably like 350-word text messages in response of everything that you're doing, and it's crazy to think that you're retired and you're doing so much.
Yeah, a lot of the retirees before I went, many of my mentors, they all just talked about how busier they were in retirement than they were when they were on the job, which I always thought was crazy, because working and being a part of a number of cadres and going to a lot of conferences, I couldn't imagine being busier than that. And well, actually, it seems like I am busier at times. I mean, like this month is crazy with everything that's going on. But yeah, it's sometimes you feel really busy, and sometimes I feel alone and I'm very slow at home.
Well, I mean, I think that's what you're supposed to enjoy, those moments, but maybe not for you.
Well, no, I do enjoy them. I mean, I get a common question at conferences I'm going to, and because I do have a little bit of a social media presence, there's a number of firefighters that know my situation. Like, hey, the first question is, hey, how's retirement? And I'm usually a pretty honest person. And I said, I'm still in transition. Depends on who I'm talking to, but a lot of the times my really close friends, I mean, like, yeah, I struggle at times with retirement, given the type of person I am and the love for the job. But I try to explain that it is a transition for me, but the benefits that I have, for those that know, I was living in one state. My wife and I owned a house in Vegas, where our kid and our grandkids are, and she had retired before I did. So we had built a house in an over 55 community here. It's awesome. We have a pool, gorgeous view, and the weather is, well, it's going to be like 98 degrees today. But I was working up in Washington State, and I was living with friends. We had lived apart. I'd visit home at least every month, but not every week. And we lived apart for like 3 years. And so the benefit of retirement is I have one place that I call my home now. I get to see the granddaughters every week, so, which is awesome.
Yeah, I actually refer to you when I talk to other people, when they say Rob Fisher, for example, you're going to be in Mile High this weekend. I don't even know why we're recording today. We should have just done a live episode while you were in town, but I'm sure you were busy for that. But I call you Uncle Robbie, because you've actually met my daughter, and you met her in Pensacola at COBC. And I have a story to tell about that. So you and I had never met before Pensacola this year, I believe it was COBC this year in April. But I had communicated with you after seeing you on the scrap, and because of your social media presence and the things you post, they really resonate with me. So I would reach out to you, but if anybody that knows me, I post about my baby all the time because I absolutely love my baby, you know, our NICU journey and everything like that. And I actually met you. So the first time you met Lily was in Pensacola. I met you at Mile High last year. And you were teaching with Brothers in Battle. And I had done the training. I had seen you kind of walking around. I'm like, man, that's Rob Fisher. But I didn't have the balls to walk up to you and introduce myself. And I was wondering how that would go. And I went up to you and I'm like, hey, Chief, I'm not sure if you know me. My name's Preston. And the first thing you said, oh, yeah, hey, how's the baby doing? And that completely like took my breath away. I'm like, this guy I had never met in real life. We've only chatted on social media. You actually paid attention to what's going on in my life. And that was the first thing because, I mean, I think you can tell it was a very important thing for me. But I just want to let you know personally, I'm very grateful for that one experience from the first time I met you.
Yeah, I was, my wife and I were on the journey with you guys, NICU, and we see the post. I mean, this is one of the benefits of social media, that the positives of social media, that you can put that stuff out there, and people who really care about you or trying to learn about things, you know, I had met you, but cared about your story. And yeah, it was easy to connect you to, plus the sleeves you got. I mean, you know, your tattoos, how do you forget somebody that has tattoos like that? But yeah, Lily, that whole story was pretty incredible, and how you guys had to battle through all of that, and watching her grow and get bigger. And, you know, I loved all the posts that you were doing when she was really, really, you know, small. And I think there's a post of you having her in your hand or something.
Oh, yeah.
And if I remember correctly, and then just you look at her now, and now she's going on these long hikes, and she's venturing out. So that's all.
Yeah. And it makes me feel a certain kind of way when you talk about you being able to be around your grandbabies, your granddaughters. That's definitely a goal for me growing up, and cherishing the family side of it.
Yeah,
You know, a little bit more.
yeah, it's super important. I mean, if there was one thing, one of the things that I wish I could go back and change some things on. My wife and I have a great relationship, and I have a great relationship with our son. But, you know, in those years when he was younger, I was a busybody and seeking knowledge and wanting to improve my fire department and be a part of the greater fire service across the United States. And, you know, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I probably made some mistakes along the way. You know, I coached baseball, so I coached my kids' team, but there are a lot of sacrifices that go into that. When you're trying to balance all of those things, it is very difficult. So I guarantee you that I could have given more. I'll just say it that way. I could have given more. And so my dad, who's no longer around, he was a great dad to have, hardworking guy, always involved, but he was involved in everything, but, you know, really loved us as kids, loved grandkids, absolutely loved grandkids. I wish he was around to see his first great grandkid, and he wasn't, but I didn't want to be just like my dad in that respect. And I'm fortunate to have my grandkids close. I'm fortunate to be retired. They're young, and so I can spend a lot of time with them. Like I said, we see them just about every week, if not multiple times in the week, and they come over to swim. Yeah, dinner at our house is swim and eat, and then maybe swim again.
You know, you post pictures of the pool and drinking wine out in your backyard, and I'm very jealous every time. I make sure to say that too, every time you make a post on it. But that actually brings me up on a topic that we hadn't actually discussed, but it's wanting to be an into the job fireman and make an impact and go to outside trainings, because you're always a student of this craft and you never feel like you're ahead on anything really. Like if it's not one thing, it's another, but also being a family man at the same time, because there's no one lining up to invite you onto a podcast, and there's no conferences that we want to go to anyways about being a good spouse and a parent, but it's extremely important. So for someone who's gone through that journey, like what's your message to the younger generation that has young kids, but are also trying to, you know, be a part of the fire service and make an impact there?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, you got to have a good work-life balance. And my generation, being a Z-Gener, really wasn't built on that, you know, and so mine might have been off a little bit. And you got to kind of go back to like the conferences we see today, the young firefighters seeing today didn't exist in the 90s. my first conference, and I've tried to figure out exactly when it was, but it was like 1995 or 96 was my first conference, and it was in San Jose. So I went from basically Seattle area down to San Jose, and it was just different back then, and there wasn't very many of them. So it was like when you went to a conference, it was a big deal. So I don't know the exact number, but that was like a West Coast conference, and Firehouse had their own conference, and there was a magazine that Fire Engineering bought called Fire Rescue Magazine. Then there was Fire Engineering FDIC. All of these things were kind of going on. So you went to the three main ones, and then there were these like regional ones. Today, there is a conference every week, if not multiple conferences every week. So it's a little bit more challenging on that work-life balance. But to answer your question, what I would do today as a young firefighter is involve your family in as much of the conference that you can. And I work with County Fire Tactics with Chief Ike, and one of the things that CFT does very well is now they have a beach, Pensacola Beach, so it makes it really attractive to spouses. They're like, yeah, we'll go to the beach. But he has always done conferences that involve spouses. One, I would say try to involve them. And just like in leadership, anytime you involve your people into things, it makes it really a lot better for the end result of like, the family unit or, trying to get something accomplished. So if you can involve your spouse and your kids and make a conference where it's a family event, you go and learn and then you enjoy it as a family. I think that's awesome. But everybody is a little bit different. Relationships at home is different. So you got to really be self-aware what the relationship is like. And I'm very fortunate. My wife is very independent. In fact, she's one of the wives that kept on asking when, she's like, when do you go back to work type of thing? Because she likes her alone time. And there are many wives that don't like that. They would rather have their husband home, and they would rather their husband work days and then be home every night. And that's just a different environment. But my wife's very independent. She's been very supportive over the years. So she jokingly would say it's Rob's world, and because of the conference and everything. I know she's joking, but she's been very, very supportive. And then today, I mean, in the last 5 years or so, she's joined the Fire Wife Life group with Todd Edwards and his wife Kathy, and Kevin McCart and his wife Tracy. And so she's now a regional director for Fire Wife Life. And so when I go to these conferences, my wife is either working at the conference or doing things herself. So that's just an example of if you can involve them, it really helps out. And you just got to be aware and have good conversations with your spouse. And like you desire to be challenged and learn new things, but you can't do it once a month if it's not working at home. And some people do have that ability to be able to do that, but that's a different relationship. So it would be like you can't be FDNY when you're in a suburban department of 5 stations.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really look at what your environment is and take that into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been slightly envious of certain firefighters that are always messaging me. They're like, "Are you going to this conference? You go, I'll see you here at this conference, this conference, this conference, this conference." And I'm like, my wife would have my head on a pike if I was trying to go to every single possible conference across the country. And it's because we don't have that relationship. But I have had the conversation, like we're talking about, of I had to explain to my wife why it's important. Recharging the batteries and connecting with like-minded individuals, and why I need to go, because I don't necessarily get all of that in my own fire department. And many people that listen to this podcast or the weekly scrap or whatever, or go to the conferences, have I would like to think, a bigger purpose, like a bigger mission than themselves. And that's why we go to those, so we can continue to just learn and network. And I think that's something that, like you said, we need to explain to our wife. Once I explain that to my wife, she goes, okay, I understand you need this for your own mental health and for your own career, but understand that I have my own career and you have a baby at home. So just try to balance it. It's kind of ridiculously hard, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, some wives, if I remember correctly, your wife's either a PA or she's a nurse practitioner, right? So she would understand a little bit, because that profession has conferences to learn. So she would understand it a little bit better versus, a spouse that is a clerk or, works as a manager for a large, department store or something. that profession doesn't necessarily have conferences. So they don't necessarily understand it. They don't see it in their work. And so when you get into the fire service, a lot of the change that has occurred in the last decade is a result of conferences, because firefighters need to get out, need to get away from their region, and need to get together and network with other firefighters to, first of all, understand that their department is no different than a department that's on the other side of the country, and that everybody's dealing with the same problems, but yet you get to learn from other people from all around. So it is important that you go to conferences to kind of get that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you mentioned before, and we'll finish off this topic with this, there are spouse tracks that your spouse can be a part of. Pensacola, COBC, and Water on the Fire has spouse tracks, I believe. And then was it North Carolina Fire Days has a really cool spouse track. Firemanship had a spouse track. So they're popping up along with these conferences that are everywhere. They're starting to acknowledge the fact that they need to involve the spouses just for everything that we just addressed.
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate being a part of like Brothers in Battle. Cody and Andrea, they've always been involving of everybody's spouse. I mean, it's when you're a part of BIB, you're part of a big family. It's almost like a gang. You jump in, you jump out type of thing. And so, but Cody always said that once you're in on the family, you're always part of the family, even if you don't instruct for a long period of time. We've got guys that had started with BIB before I did that I've met, but I haven't seen them in 10 years. And it's just because they're in a different chapter of their lives, and they weren't instructing, or they're not instructing as much now as they did once before, but they're a part of the family. So family is important, man.
Absolutely. And we talked about this to transition into a topic that's completely different than what we were just talking about. But I want to talk about truck company operations, specifically in the suburban setting. And the reason why I want to hit it early is because I know the truckie attention span doesn't go past like 30 minutes. So and also, we're doing this thing in our department as well. We are a 7-station department with 1 quint, and there are people passionate about implementing a truck culture, but they want it today. What was that journey like for you in your department? Because I know you were part of that transition. You didn't have a truck company or operation beforehand, and you were part of implementing it, correct?
Yeah, I was a group of individuals. At the time, there were 3 officers assigned to our only ladder, which was a quint. And then early in the 2000s, we went to a 4-platoon system. So there was 4 of us, all senior officers. But yeah, my interest in truck operations started, like I said, my first conference was in 95 or 96, but one of my first classes that I took was a class at the LAFD by Lane Kemper, who was he's since passed, but Lane was a captain on one of the busiest truck companies in LAFD. So I got my first exposure to realistic forcible entry training. And at that time, LAFD didn't use irons, and they were doing all saw work, so circ saw work for forcible entry. After that class, it was very apparent to me that there is a culture out there that we just didn't have. My organization was a small, mostly on-call or part-paid department with some career firefighters, and we were growing through the late 80s and the early 90s. And then next thing you know, we get into the late 80s, and we're 5 stations, and we have a ladder truck that we don't even really understand everything about it. It's a quint. And so I really went down that journey, that like, what can we do to be a better truck company? And so took a lot of conferences. Yeah, when you're trying to make change, something as drastic as that, it is very difficult, because you have to think of the environment that everybody was in. We didn't have a ladder. So of course, we've been able to put out fires without a ladder truck. Why would we need a ladder truck? And those are getting down that is, there's a lot of reasons why, or you shouldn't, or you should have a ladder company. But that was hard. And then when you're coming back from conferences and wanting to implement some of those techniques and skills, and then we didn't have circ saws like that. So trying to get a circ saw that can do that stuff, trying to get a real set of irons, because we had that piece of shit hooligan bars, made by Paratech. All of that change comes with some sacrifices, and it doesn't come easy. So yeah, it was very, very difficult. And kind of going back to the whole, suburban concept with ladder trucks, and one of the classes that I used to teach, and now I'm bringing back, just because nobody really took it on after I stopped doing it, was class on Quint operations. And its focus is, the class is called Quint Considerations for the Single Truck Suburban Department. Because the reality is, suburban departments typically only have one, and you have to try to function in a Quint as a ladder truck in a department that doesn't really have enough staffing, enough resources, and you're the only one. And, and without getting too deep into it, I'll tell you that how I first viewed it as a Quint, when I first put together the class and was writing on it and lecturing on it, and how I am today, it's changed. It's changed. I wouldn't say it's 180 degrees, but it's changed because in light of a lot of the data that FSRI has come out with, and UL and everything, is like, I've had to reshape it a little bit. So it is a struggle for suburban departments to have a Quint. And when you haven't had that culture, it is going to be a huge struggle, getting to the end. And you and I were chatting earlier, or you had mentioned, that I get credit for the 10 pounds of pressure 100% of the time. If there was anything that I learned out of all of those years, and I probably put it somewhere near a decade of working on a ladder truck and making change like that, is I learned that I probably would have been a lot easier if I would have just done 10 pounds of pressure 100% of the time. I was a little aggressive and a little direct, and I don't want to, to some degree I was, I wasn't compromising, but we had for the most part 3 officers and three senior firefighters that were drivers on the ladder truck, all in agreement. So we were, we agreed as a company and we agreed as a station, but we kind of alienated ourselves as a company in the station with others in our organization, and the organization was growing.
Was that truck you had, was that a dual house, or was that like a truck? And
no, we were at that time we were in a 1996 Simon Duplex LTI, which LTI made a great ladder truck. It was a rear mounted Quint, 400-gallon tank. It had 126 feet of ground ladders on it. So when you're looking at like NFPA and Quints, NFPA just requires 85 feet of ground ladders. An aerial apparatus by NFPA only has to have 115 feet of ground ladders, and we were exceeding the minimum requirement for an aerial apparatus. But it wasn't really well laid out. It was, when we spec'd the truck, there was very few things that we could change on it. So it's basically almost like buying, it wasn't a demo, but it was almost like buying a demo. This is what it is, make it work. But yeah, we did that for a long time. And we did a lot of really great things. And I think we helped push the truck culture for suburban departments in our county, in our region. As a result, I started teaching with Firetown. I started teaching on our own and started sharing information. And I think it really helped us kind of get out, what should we be doing for a suburban department when it comes to trucks. And partly in my Quint class, one of the things is, and it's funny, we were just in I'm in a Facebook group with Dennis Laguerre and a whole bunch of propeller heads, and it came up like Dennis had made a quote about urban departments having a 3-to-1 ratio engine to truck, and where was that coming from? And so getting a part of that whole conversation, I'm like, man, I've been teaching that, and Dennis, I thought I got it from you. I can't remember where the quote was from, but I know that it was accurate at least. And we finally found the information. But generally speaking, urban departments are a 3-to-1 ratio, and suburban departments, if you're really good, is 5-to-1. And my department is 10 stations, and we have one truck covering 10 stations. Now, mind you, we have automatic gate around us, and we can get other trucks. But generally speaking, that is pretty accurate. It's anywhere between 5 and 10-to-1 is the ratio for suburban departments.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if the North Denver metro area is any different than the rest of the country, but we're pretty much stacked on top of each other as far as mutual aid goes, to where we do blue card, but it's one of those things where before you finish your 360, it's like level 1, like everyone is already stacking up on you. So from that viewpoint, it would be easy, in my opinion, to implement a truck style culture, because it's not like a truck is showing up first due and they're by themselves for 10 minutes before the next arrival comes. And then also in our area, it's not just single family homes anymore. I mean, you're starting to see mid-rise 4 to 5 story apartment complexes show up, townhomes, row homes. They're all just getting implemented because of the demand for housing now in the country is still pretty high. And instead of single family homes where it's a lot of bigger square footage lots, they're starting to cram these multifamilies in the suburban environment. So I think it justifies more for a suburban department to start implementing that truck.
Yeah, in my class, I mean, it's we kind of cover a lot of those things. And one of the problems, though, is in today's society, and no offense to, I mean, you're probably a Z-Gener, I would assume.
I'm a millennial.
Okay, you're
I'm
a
old
millennial.
enough.
All right. Hey, I don't want to take anything away from you. But
I mean,
anyways,
they don't get a ton of credit either, but I'm still a millennial.
but today's generation, with wanting instant gratification, I go to conferences to teach the class, and everybody's just like, "What do I do for quint operations?" And one of my slides is a silver bullet. And I was like, there is no silver bullet when it comes to suburban truck operations. I mean, the suburban truck company is a quint, and there is not a silver bullet, and you have to take into account so many different factors. And not that I'm trying to create work for myself and consulting, but you can't just like, how do I deal with this? And because you have to take so much into consideration. As an example, Blue Card is one of the things. I mean, one of the things I like about Blue Card, there's things I like and I dislike about Blue Card, but one of the things I do like about Blue Card when we implemented in our region was it on commercial buildings, it essentially puts the truck to the roof for a roof report. And I think that's really good. I mean, that is important information. And having been on many roofs, and I will tell you that the individuals that are on the roof, given a roof report or doing vertical ventilation, whatever it is, they'll be able to tell you when the building is starting to crumble. You will see it from the roof before you'll see it anywhere else, because the firefighters inside where it's pitch black and they're flowing a line and not going to be able to see it. And you're not going to see it from from the BC SUV, climate controlled SUV, because they can't see a flat roof. But we can see it on the roof. So one thing is like, I think that's important. But other things is what are your resources, and how quickly do they respond to the area? As an example, my station was in the middle of densely populated area. So we were in the middle of residential and or single family and multifamily dwellings. And we went to a decent amount. We were first due to a decent amount of working fires in our first due area, but we had 5 engines within 2 minutes of us. So when we would go to these fires, we would get at least 1 or 2 engines to arrive within a minute to 2 minutes. And so by the time you got out in Blue Card style, you got out, you kind of figure things out. You do somewhat of a 360. So you know that, if it has a basement or not, don't have victims on the Charlie side. Really, by the time I get done with that, the engine is a block out. I can hear them, right? And so I could just have them come up and stretch a line, because they had more hose than I did. They had more water than I did. They were better suited for the fire attack than I did. But the trouble when we transitioned to Blue Card is we weren't a pure Blue Card. We had made some modifications. Like we searched without a hose line. We did vertical ventilation, those types of things. But one of the things that we were having a struggle with is the Blue Card, I'll call them Blue Card nerds. They were not wanting to let go of the whole level 1. And so they wanted whoever arrived first, the only other person that could come to the scene or the only other person that could bypass level 1 was the BC. And I said, this is ridiculous. A medic unit that has no water could arrive first. And then a BC who has no water, they can bypass level 1. And we fought for that. We fought over that for, 5 years. And now, like in my department, we've modified our level 1 to the first arriving suppression engine, the first arriving ladder, and the BC all go to the scene. Everybody else level 1s. And that makes common sense. It makes more sense. So there's all of those factors that need to be taken into consideration. Somebody that's listening to this is going, man, I'm in a suburban department, just like Rob Fisher's, and, we have 10 stations or whatever. I had 10 stations that were covering a small area, 140 square miles, but 5 of the stations at that time were covering like 50 square miles. So it made it really easy for us to get on top of each other versus you might be covering 500 square miles with 10 stations, and it's not going to work the same.
Yeah, and I know you talked about that on the scrap, is being able to determine when to do vertical ventilation and stuff like that based on the manpower and apparatus arrival, things like that. But I'm very interested in that Quint class. I'm gonna bug you on some of the details on that. And if you're going to bring it back, or you have brought it back?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
I'm gonna forward it to my training chief. That's why I'm asking.
Here's the story on it. I can't remember the exact. It was created sometime in like 2010 as a result of some of our challenges and trying to share our challenges. And then 2012 or 13 was the first time I presented at FDIC, and I did that all the way until like 2019, I think. And then I got promoted, to BC, and so I didn't think that I was probably the right person to be teaching that class, and others should step up and teach. And maybe one of my mistakes is I didn't really bring somebody up and help mentor an officer that was working on a Quint that could take on the class and move it forward. Kind of like Dave Dodson's artery and smoke class.
Yeah.
He shared it with Rob Backer and Phil Jost, and now those guys continue the class, and Dave's moved on. So anyways, maybe I made that mistake and I didn't do a good enough job there, but nobody took on the class, and it was still becoming issues. And so I would end up talking to a lot of people about it. And then somebody would say, "Didn't you do a class like eight years ago?" Yeah. And so then I was bringing up the old material, and then I just recently, this last weekend, taught it at the Heart of the Lakes in Alexandria, Minnesota. I modified it and I submitted it for FDIC, and I got accepted to FDIC for 2025. Yes, it is kind of coming back and with a new twist on things.
Yeah, I think we have a mutual friend out there. Was it Nolan that picked you up from the airport?
Yeah, Nolan. Yeah, I had a 2-hour drive with Nolan, and we had a good conversation about how to implement Quint truck culture in an organization that's
perfect.
Not too supportive of it initially.
Yeah. I have so not to give too much information, but there's a few people in my organization that are trying to implement this truck culture. And I spoke with one of them specifically, and they presented it to a handful of people in the department. And they looked at him like he was trying to serve peanut butter on a slice of pizza or something like that. They were like, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Don't ever talk about it ever again in this department." Like, that's kind of what we're dealing with right now as well. So it's just, I don't know. It's just serving it up on a platter, building the proper relationships and credibility, I guess. Right.
Well, let me just say, I mean, peanut butter on pizza. If you've ever had like Thai chicken pizza, it has peanut sauce on it. So so just tell them to eat a Thai chicken pizza, and that's where the peanut butter comes from. But yeah, it's not easy. And I should go back and say the conversation that I had with Nolan wasn't that their department is not supportive of it, just how their department is structured, how they use things, and they hold on to a lot of traditions. And it goes back to my point, is like, you've never really had a truck. It's going to be hard for you to instill a truck culture. And it's going to take time. If you have support from the very top and fairly active, engaged chief officers, it can be implemented quicker. But you got to think of what environment were they raised in. And if they were raised in an all-engine environment, they're going to have a hard time seeing the benefits of having a truck, because they look at it as all the fires went out when I was on the job, on the line. And so it takes a lot of education. The Quint and ladder trucks are, in those types of departments, they're promoted primarily because of the ISO rating and trying to make sure that you lower your ISO rating so that you can, benefit the taxpayers and everything. But I think that's when a lot of chiefs don't really understand. I mean, I don't want to say they don't understand ISO ratings, but they just don't really take into account, like, having a Quint doesn't really help out that much. You want to have an aerial device because you have a need for it. And another myth is you don't have aerial devices just because you have high rises. They can only go so high. The truck culture is a mindset. It's not an aerial device of any type. The aerial device just gives you the ability to be able to do some things that you wouldn't be able to do with regular ground ladders. So like, if you are typical suburban department, no high rises, But you have mid-rises, you have multifamily dwellings that, are 3, maybe 4 stories. Having an aerial device really helps out. So again, the mindset of being a truck is more important than the actual apparatus itself. And as an example, in my region, there's a department, Getchell Fire, that's in Snohomish County, and they have had part paid firefighters for a long time. And we're talking young kids, 18, these are the ones that are coming in, want to be firefighters, and they start at Getchell. Well, Getchell is situated just outside of a busy department in Snohomish County that sees regular work, and just because of their demographics. And early on, myself and my driver, Chad, had taught a lot of classes to Getchell on roof operations. They attended a lot of Firetown classes. And so their culture is very heavy in the truck mindset. And they probably were venting more roofs than my ladder company was venting, just because of their location, the proximity to a department that was seeing regular work. And they were working on an engine, and they were young. And so well-trained firefighters, when you got the right information, and it didn't even have an aerial device, they were really aggressive truck mindset department.
Yeah, that's I don't know. That seems pretty rare to me to hear about, but that's pretty awesome. I mean, and I have to remind myself that my department specifically, it was all volunteer in the mid 1940s, and that's like 2 firefighters ago. You know what I mean? So I have to humble myself and say, like you talked about, the people that want my generation with instant gratification and the change needs to happen now and all this, I need to realize that just a few years ago, we were single resource response in denim jeans, set the pump, go into the house and fight a fire by yourself. So yes, play the long game, slow your roll with that kind of stuff, implementing some type of change. It's hard. It's hard with my generation and anybody younger because we got Google and YouTube, and we get all the facts and data without any of the implementation, and we just want all the change right now.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing to add, and I'm sure we're going to move on to a different topic. When you look at like traditional truck culture, traditional that came from the urban departments and double house, and a lot of quints are not double house, not all of them, but a lot of them are not double house, which is why they have quints. But double house, very specific division of labor in the house, right? So you had an engine and a truck leaving for some type of fire. The truck would arrive and force entry for the engine. The engine would take care of movement of water, and the truck would search. The truck would do initial ventilation, like an OV position, initial ventilation. And then depending on, where you are, but there was always some element, or I shouldn't say always, there was a high likelihood that there was going to be some type of vertical element. So be it that you're in, in a tenement building, they had to get up and open up the bulkhead door, skylights, sometimes they'd get up in the cock loft and they'd have to vent that. So all of those, that was truck work. Today, what units primarily do primary search? Engine companies, EMS units, fire-based EMS. One of the benefits of being fire-based EMS is now we put 2 firefighters in a fast unit that can get out ahead of the engine, ahead of the truck, and can get on scene fairly quickly. And if the unit is organized correctly and has the right equipment on it, they're an inside team, and they can start the search. So you had said earlier, were we a double house? No, we weren't a double house, but I did have EMS units assigned to the station. It would come and go. And what we would do is there was 3 on the ladder, and there was 2 on the EMS unit. They were our inside team. So early on, one of the things that we implemented is we put a pressurized water can on our EMS unit. We put a hook, 5-foot hook, which was an inside hook for our department. We put a set of irons. They had a tick before we had ticks everywhere. And so they knew they were going to be the inside team, and they would, and I never told them, hey, you got to follow me. These were the youngest firefighters, typically in the station. And I never said, hey, follow the ladder truck to the call. I'd be like, if you can get out of the station before we do, head to the call. Just don't park in front of the house and leave room, get your gear and get ready to go. You're probably going to do primary search. So when we're looking at like the truck operations, traditional, the truck did all those things, and now it's kind of changed. So now that everybody's doing primary search, which is great, meaning that engines take that role a lot of the time. And if your department's not doing vertical ventilation, then and you're not doing forcible entry, because we don't really, in the suburban setting, we don't have the urban forcible entry issue. The engine takes care of their initial forcible entry to get inside the building. The engine or engines will be doing search. Okay. And if your department doesn't do vertical ventilation, now the truck is doing what? Ground ladders, right? Could do search, but ground ladders. And so it kind of puts a little bit of, it's kind of shaping the suburban truck a little bit different. And it doesn't mean that we have to get rid of aerial devices and get rid of trucks. It just means that it's changing a little bit. And so you have to adapt with it. And it's all possible. It's just a matter of sitting down, laying out what the organization needs to be doing. It needs leadership's involvement to accept or, entrust the people that know this stuff. And, and then you got to figure out, what do you guys want to do? I could argue the benefits of vertical ventilation and all the data that supports it. But if the chief is not going to allow it, and then it doesn't really matter. Again, 10 pounds of pressure. You don't try to beat them up over it and say they don't know what they're talking about. You're like, okay, well, we're not going to do vertical ventilation right now, but we might at some point. We might be making that. So you just got to think it's in the suburban setting. It's changing, and you just have to, you kind of got to go with the flow, and you got to, adapt. You can't be an urban truck.
Well said. And I actually want to continue I want to use this topic to talk about, because I know there's a lot of people listening to this that want this truck culture. And I believe the majority of the fire service is a lot of that suburban setting, but they don't have that truck culture. You're going to be at Mile High, and you're going to be teaching some like truck style. I don't want to give anything away unless you want to, but there are truck classes happening at Mile High this weekend. Irons and Ladders is teaching, and then you're teaching. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. Young guy goes to a conference, gets super excited, recharges his batteries, highly motivated to bring something back to his organization. But then they hit that brick wall of wanting to implement change. They go to their chiefs, they go to their company officers, and they say, this is the special sauce to implement this truck culture that we've been talking about. Like, how I want to serve it up to you on a platter. Like, where are we making mistakes as young firemen trying to make change when we come back from conferences? Like, what should we be doing instead?
Okay, yeah, Mile High. I mean, we'll start right there. Mile High. I know for sure there's 3 truck classes that are going on. I'm teaching with the highwaymen, so we're going to do West Coast vertical ventilation class, or I should say West Coast approach to vertical ventilation, and we're a cadre of truckies from all across the nation, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Brothers in Battle doing forcible entry and some live fire stuff. And then Irons and Ladder. I think they're doing ground ladder. I don't remember, but there's multiple truck classes that's being offered up there. As for I spent a good first part of being promoted as a company officer, coming back and just taking a beating, because I wanted to see change. I think the biggest mistake, if I were to go back, and again, we've already talked about 10 pounds of pressure 100% of the time. But I think the biggest mistake for young firefighters is not understanding and not having good situational awareness, not understanding the environment that they're in. And in their environment, they have to know how much can they absorb. So it's like teaching recruits. They can only absorb so much information. I can't just open up and just spill all my information, because they can only take in so much. And the same thing is true when you're coming back to your organization with, all these new things. It's like in an organization that has been built on, certain traditions and your culture and your organization, you can only move the ball so much. The likelihood that you're going to come back and do a Hail Mary and score a touchdown is not really that high. You're better off moving the ball, with a running game and slowly softening them up, so that you can then, you're pulling them in, so then you can get that pass off. But understand your environment. It's okay to be passionate. Share your passion with people that that are going to be passionate with you. One of the things I would say is, when you go to a conference by yourself, it really is you come back amped, and there's nobody to help you. And so one is bring a brother or sister with you to the conference and share in that excitement and that knowledge. And then you can share in the strategy on how do we try to bring something back and implement it. And then lastly, if there's a lot of naysayers and you have senior senior firefighters that, they don't buy into vertical ventilation or whatever it may be. And I just think back to like trying to change our Halligan bars from the Paratech shiny bar to a Pro bar. That did not come easily. And you think today, it's like, it's almost, well, most department, why would you buy something other than a Pro bar or, other than the Council bar and all those other ones? But to make that change, sometimes you need to bring that senior member with you to that type of training. And so they can hear it, because the other problem that I had is, there's the saying, you're never a prophet in your own town or in your own city, and is so true. I mean, I'm not the only one that has battled that, but a lot of the times when you come back and you're all by yourself, it's like it's going to be difficult. So don't lose hope. That I would say that in the time period that we changed the truck culture in my organization, and it had some impact in the region too. It's still changing today. And I first got assigned to the ladder truck in like 2000. And I left the ladder truck in 2016. So, there was 16 years of being on the ladder truck, and it was still changing, and it is still changing today. So, just do your little part to help make a little bit of change. And that's where the, kind of where the 10 pounds of pressure 100% of the time comes in. It's like, just slow it down a little bit.
I've also heard you talk about this, specifically talking about conferences. And when you talk about the truck culture, or truck operations, they're constantly changing. That's why I believe conferences are extremely valuable, so we can stay on top of the trends and the things that are improving and the fire service evolving. But I've heard you say you hardly ever see fire chiefs at conferences. And I wholeheartedly agree. I won't bash them too much, but I remember having a conversation with my fire chief after I came back from a conference. I've already learned my lesson at this point of not dumping everything that I learned on them. But I said, it was a good opportunity to network and meet people. And my fire chief specifically said, man, it's been, I don't know, almost 2 decades since I've been to a conference. And I'm like, yeah, I know, chief. That's the problem. So, but instead of MFing my fire chief, I said, hey, chief, like next year, if you ever want to go to a fire conference, let me know what you're going to go to. I want to go with you. I'd love to be with you on that journey, or, it doesn't have to be the fire chief, right? It could be ops chief, something like that. It'd be like, hey, are you going to go to a conference next year? I'd love to go with you, chief. I think that'd be pretty cool. What does that do? Have you ever done that, or has someone ever done that with you, or have you seen how that would work to try to convince your fire chief into going to a conference or anything like that?
Oh, wow. You really want to open up a can of worms. I would say that I go to a lot of conferences, and I help with a lot of conferences, and I can probably, in the last handful of years, I can count on one hand the number of fire chiefs: Eddie Robinson, Scott
Love
Thompson. I'm trying to think of other. In our conference, Chief Soto from Spokane Valley was there, but I can count probably on my hand, for sure on 2 hands, the number of fire chiefs that attend. And so I'm gonna beat them up, but I'm also gonna support them in saying this. You have to realize that the fire chief has a different role than company officer and firefighter on the line. If we were talking about battalions, then I'll beat battalions up all day long. But fire chief, and it's really hard to get a fire chief to come to a fire conference, but you have to realize that their job is different. And so it goes into a bigger issue with leadership, and that if you are the fire chief, you better trust your people and you better support your people. And so if your people, be it that it's the ops chief, battalion chief group, or company officer group, is saying, hey, we need to change to this type of bar. And let me back up. Engine operations, they have the same issue, trying to bring back a smoothbore nozzle or a bolt bed or whatever it is. They have the same problem. So it's all of the fire service. But imagine you're trying to bring in some change, a bolt bed, or trying to bring in vertical ventilation. If the fire chief doesn't trust the people within their organization, they're not going to allow for it to happen. And even then, I mean, if the fire chief is not sitting in the conferences, it's very difficult for it to happen. And fire chiefs have a hard time doing this because fire chiefs are busy and they've got other things they got to be thinking about, which is why it's so important and is critical that the higher you ascend in being an officer and in the ranks, the more trust and the more that you have to empower your people and trust that they're doing what's in the best interest of the organization. And we could talk hours on that. So to some degree, I don't think that seeing fire chiefs at conferences is really, Scott Thompson talks about it in his lecture, and yeah, it would be great to see fire chiefs, because then that means that they're supporting the mission, they're supporting the men and women that are there at the conference, and they kind of know what's going on, and they're not lost in it all. But I also believe that they should be, the problem is not so much that they're not attending, it's that they're just not allowing for it to be implemented, because they don't have the trust or empowerment. And we're not even talking about budget stuff, really, because anything can be planned. I want to change to I want to change to the Pro bar. It's like, well, they're at the time $185 a piece, and we were buying this other bar that was probably on $165, $185 as well. Like, let's just change the type of bar we get. Let's just spec out our apparatus that has that bar on it. And yes, it might take us 5 years to get there, but can we not get there? Well, it didn't matter. It still was a challenge, right? So as for fire, I think ops chiefs should be attending these types of conferences. Fire chiefs need to attend conferences so that they know how to manage the organization, and they need to be good leaders. I mean, as an example, my leadership group and mentor group that I share with my partner, Ryan Selleck, and because I said partner, and I'm from Washington, doesn't mean that type of partner. He's my business partner. But Ryan and I, our conference is always open for free to fire chiefs. And we've only had one fire chief that I know of that has attended over the handful of years we've attended, or that we've had our conference. But the importance is that fire chiefs need to be focused on a little bit of other things, but that means that they need to be allowing their people to do their job. So ops chiefs should be attending. Battalion chiefs, because I was one, you do see battalion chief from time to time, but that group should be attending these conferences purely out of support of their men and women who are company officers and firefighters. And they should have an idea of what's going on the fire ground. It's a hard transition going from being a company officer to a battalion chief, unless of course you're some shitbag and all you want to do is just be, you just want the title and you just want some more power. But if you're really into the job and everything, it's a hard transition, because you have to learn to step back and be more of a supportive role to what was once really, really fun and what you were really good at one time. But it's really odd. It's like that group, you don't see very many battalion chiefs attending conferences, and they're the ones that have a white helmet that should absolutely be at these conferences.
I've never met a power hungry battalion chief before in my life. Just kidding. No, I will give props to one of my BCs. He actually came out with me to COBC this year it was his very first conference out in Pensacola. And I talked to him not too long ago. He signed up for a BC boot camp next year, I think February or something like that. So he's got a little bit of the Kool-Aid in his system now. He used to actually see my "It's Worth the Risk" sticker on coffee cups and stuff. And he's like, that should say "It's Worth the Risk" assessment. And I'm like, thanks, Chief. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. But he came out with me. He's one of those battalion chiefs that actually went out there and he had a great time. And he's actually going to be at BC boot camp. So that's I've been working on him. So that's why I kind of asked you, is like, what's the conversation look like to get your chiefs to come out to these conferences? Because maybe if you just get them out there, they buy in.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you can, I would say, if you, as a firefighter or company officer, try to bring your battalion chief, because they're sitting in the right meetings that they can help influence change, and you need their buy-in. You need that group's buy-in for operational changes on the fire ground. Because the reality is, you could try to go to the top, to the chief, and get the chief to support change of culture, or whatever it may be. But you really need to get the battalion chief group who are managing the fires to feel comfortable with whatever it is. And I'll be 100% honest. I'm comfortable with the roof operations, vertical ventilation, but I will say that as a battalion chief sitting in my climate controlled SUV, watching a group that maybe I hadn't trained, personally, or I've got some question over their dedication to the craft, and, they've got the assignment to go to the roof. And I'm like, it can be troublesome. So I can only imagine a battalion chief that never worked on a ladder truck, never really did vertical ventilation. And all of a sudden you're like, hey man, we want to put guys and gals on the roof and want to cut a hole and you want to do these things. And they're like, what? So they need to be exposed, and they need to, you get that, as you said earlier, you get a lot of that at conferences. I mean, that's the benefit of today where there's a conference all the time, is that there's so much information that can be shared.
Yeah. And two things, especially in Pensacola, Chief Ike does, or whoever would instructors on the stage will say, do we have any chiefs in the room? And with the few chiefs that are in the room, there's like a standing ovation, a round of applause to acknowledge the fact that they're there, because they give them that acknowledgement, like, thank you for being here and being in the trenches with your people and learning and continuing that. So if you're, this is my generic message. If you're a chief and you're worried about being exposed negatively at a conference, you're like, not worshiped, but you're applauded just for being there. And second, Chief Eddie Robinson, you mentioned his name. When he shows up and he lectures and he's at these conferences and he brings some of his Choctaw people or Cherokee people with him, those guys would take a bullet for him.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see. I'm like, you're a fire chief and these guys surround you like they're your freaking Secret Service bodyguards. Like, no one's going to touch that guy at a conference, but he's out there drinking beers with his guys, and he's up there teaching, and he's so proud of his organization, and his people love him.
Yeah. If you've never heard him lecture, I mean, it's like listening to, I'll say, a college football coach, and he's not beating up on you. He's motivating you for the next, for the second half, and he's getting you all excited. And, he's one of the best when it comes to lecturing, and he supports his people. And that's the interesting thing about leadership, is that really leadership is so simple, and we make it so difficult. And if you just support your people, care for your people, show them that you care for them, empower them, through the trust, empower them, you'd be amazed of the shit they would do for you. And I got to go back to say, I just remembered, Nolan's fire chief was in the conference this last weekend as well. I think his name was Jeff Caro, but he sat through the conference too. So, there's 3 or 4 that I've seen in a handful of years at conferences, but it's very rare to see a fire chief at one of our conferences.
I got to give props to Nolan, because he's been trying to crack into the iPhone boys group. But I told him, I'm like, look, man, it's going to start with you building relationships with each individual iPhone boy. So like, here's their contact info, call them, talk to them. And he messages me all the time. He's like, hey man, I got a couple hours to chat. Like, you got time to talk on the phone? Because I don't know, he just wants to be a part of the group. I don't know how the iPhone boys became so infamous, but it's pretty cool.
I mean, I know that group exists, but it's like an elite force, because I don't know who's in the group, and so whenever scrap, iPhone boys are checking in, I'm like, who are the iPhone boys?
Yeah, it's we have a secret handshake and everything too. No, I'm just kidding. No. Let's we talked about leadership already a little bit, but in your opinion, where does leadership start?
Where does it start? Just being a good person. I mean, I think that's probably the first one. So it starts at home, being raised, learning some values, learning a work ethic, just being a good person. As an example, and you and I had talked before that maybe we'll talk about some generational stuff, but the Z generation, millennials, get beat up for not having an interest in the job, or they're just different, or they don't have any mechanical aptitude. They're always on their phone, all those things. And this is being criticism from my generation, the X generation, or maybe even before, but, for the most part. But who's leading the American Fire Service, right? The X generation. And right now, and I'm not the only one saying this, right now, I think we are in a leadership crisis in the American Fire Service. Chief David Rhodes has written and spoke upon it. And, they're the guy that has a good idea of what's going on across the American Fire Service, where he sits as editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering Magazine. He even spoke at FDIC about the mental health, result, or, just crisis that's happening. And a lot of it is related to poor leadership. So when we criticize a generation, we should be looking in the mirror, because I'll tell you what, the generation that's doing all the criticism, they're the ones that are kind of screwing up some of this leadership thing. So just being a good person, is where we start with, and caring for people. And that is, from the mission of you want to lead an organization, you want to care for people in your community. Well, the first group of people you should be caring about is the people within your organization. And I know that we've had, like in my time, I was raised in an environment that the customer is always right. Well, that's bullshit. The customer isn't always right. And because of our society and some things that we want to appease everybody and we don't want anybody to be upset. And, and I'm not saying that we need to go all the way to the other side, but we need to find some happy medium. So I think the first customer that the fire chief or the leadership needs to be worrying about is those that are part of the mission. They're the first customers. They're the first people they should be caring about. And then we should be caring about the public, because if you take care of your people, they're going to do a really good job taking care of the customer, period. But when we take care of the customer and we alienate the people within the organization, they're the ones giving the service. And guess what? You're going to have unhappy customers because the people that are doing the service are going to be very unhappy. So I know that's a long-winded answer. Just be a good person and take care of people.
I think that's extremely important. And I'll say from a personal experience, I was not a good person for a lot of years of my life. Growing up inner city Los Angeles, you have a lot of negative influence around you. And I was just a dumb, arrogant, cocky jock. And then I was your typical sailor, cussing, drinking, tattoos, chasing women, maybe not treating them all the right way. And man, I was heading down a wrong path. And I even carried that over a little bit into the fire service at first, just extremely selfish. But I knew something had to change. And then, luckily for me, I had an influence like Jocko, right? You hear Jocko all the time, extreme ownership, all this stuff. But that is the first book I ever read where I was like, man, it's not my upbringing. It's not because I was a sailor. It's not because of this. It's because I'm not taking ownership in the person that I want to be. What is that? What does the person that I want to be look like? I identified that. And then I've been on a personal journey to better myself and to be a good human being, because that is one of the problems I think in the fire service is that we are not inheriting just being good human beings to each other. And because we're not acknowledging that, we're taking out on our citizens as well.
Yeah, I could see that you were a jock. I didn't know you were a tennis player. That's pretty cool, man. I can kind of see it now. Yeah,
no. Yeah, I don't think tennis was I have dabbled in some pickleball lately. Pickleball is all the trend.
Dude, as an old retiree, here in our over 55 community, we have 6 really nice pickleball courts under lights. And the seniors here, they're serious about their pickleball, and they kick some pickleball ass. So it's pickleball, and pickleball's becoming the firehouse game. And yeah, but no, you're right. I mean, if you can learn more about yourself, and you can here's going back to the Chiefs again. When you see good people in positions, they can lead just about anything, because they're anchored their decision making anchored in just being a good person, right? And I know I keep on saying good person, but good people are good leaders. Bad people will be bad leaders, and they can have all the training in the world. They're still going to be bad leaders because their focus their intent is much different than the person's intent of like just being nice. And a lot of other qualities come from being a good person. Like you want to know about other people, you want to know about other things, you're very curious. Good leaders are curious, non-judgmental, and when you're curious, you're seeking to understand things versus I have a position. As an example, I don't believe in vertical ventilation. Well, if you go into it going, man, there's a lot of conversation about vertical ventilation, and you're curious, your interest in curiosity when you're talking to these firefighters, a group that's trying to make a change towards that, really helps motivate them. And you really should be open to all of that stuff. And it's, again, curiosity. You're not judgmental.
I think one struggle, though, with the millennials and the Gen Zers is that social media has allowed us to have confirmation bias. So if I say, You're talking about vertical ventilation. Well, you're an idiot because there's 100 people that I'm friends with on Facebook that says vertical ventilation should not be done in the suburban setting. Like we're not good at having conversations anymore where we don't just pull up our phone, pull up Google, and then now the conversation's over because we found some Google page document to back up our argument. I think that's a now struggle these days where instead of understanding each other's perspectives and diving into certain data, like we just pull out our smartphones and find some article or people to confirm our argument. And that's where we see that in sports and politics all the time.
Yeah. The problem is, I think the problem is that if there has been from the generations, the change in generation, a negative is with social media, we have access to a lot of information and it's just information. And a lot of it is incorrect. I mean, just use politics as an example. I mean, you can find something that's stating both sides of a position from, on the same topic, right? And you're like, well, what we want to know, like, what is the right answer, and when you when you just go and just look for the one answer that supports your bias, which is what you're talking about, and you're not willing to seek others, and it goes back to the curiosity and looking for it, and you're not willing to seek other information and actually compare and look it up. I mean, today's generation doesn't do as well as my generation or maybe the generation before me when it came to getting new information. I mean, when I was in high school, the internet wasn't around. And so when you had to do a book report, you had to go to something called an encyclopedia. And this was information that all the encyclopedias, generally speaking, all the different companies had encyclopedias that had information out, and it was similar information. So when you looked and you're like, this is what it says about it. Now, there's a negative to that, but there's a positive. So to get into the encyclopedia, it had to be vetted. It had to meet peer review. It had to meet all these things. So in today's world, we just don't know what is peer reviewed, or we don't care to look to see, like, what's the value of this? Like when I was in college, when the internet's about, like the number of young students that would use Wikipedia or use the internet. And what do you think the professor would say? That is not a reference. You can't use that. It's not an academic reference, for instance. You got to support it. Now you could go to Wikipedia and get initial information to kind of start your search off, but you really had to search for peer-reviewed documents and those types of things. That's where we're lacking today. And that's where leaders make a mistake, is that they're just taking their own personal belief on something and they look for something out on the internet that supports their belief. I mean, like vertical ventilation, because I know it inside and out, more than half the shit that's out there is incorrect, data-wise. And, I mean, just as an example, and Bill Carey covers it in his Data Not Drama. I mean, for years I've heard firefighters are dying on roofs, and you're like, well, we haven't lost. Last year we lost a firefighter in a vertical ventilation operation as they fell through a skylight. And yes, if they weren't on the roof, they wouldn't have fallen through a skylight, but the actual operation or a roof collapse or anything like that. Prior to that, it's been since 2011 since a firefighter had, as a result. And if I remember correctly, that firefighter fell into the hole that they cut, and which just blows my mind. I mean, the roof didn't collapse, they fell into it. So when we're looking for that stuff, the data is just not supporting it, but nobody wants to listen.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy times trying to just, it goes back to implementing change and using the proper data. I had Rob Ramirez on last week, right? And his whole thing is you got to get the data, but then you also got to vet it on the streets, like just within your own department. You can't just read something and then not take it as gospel. You have to be like, is this something that we can implement? Does this work for us and our organization? He turned a lot of heads with that one because he called out smoke divers. He said, I don't care if you're a 50-state smoke diver. If you're not getting in the data, you ain't shit. So there's a lot of guys that got riled up with that one. Yeah. I want to talk to you. You and I had a personal conversation about mentorship, and I know our time's winding down, but we talked a little bit about informal and formal mentorship. I was trying to figure out which one to try and implement into my organization. Do you have an opinion on either one of those?
Yeah. Mentorship is good. So, informal mentorship, in my opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, and I think Chief Scott Thompson put out a document that you can search on the internet I think if you go to his website, you can download the free document from his site on mentorship. But for the most part, I think that informal mentorship is probably the most valuable one, because many years ago, myself and another officer, we decided we were going to put together a mentoring group, and we did it within the organization. And one of the results, or one of our findings, is that to try to implement a mentor group within the organization under parameters is just not as valuable. That relationship is the most important aspect of mentoring. And if I were to compare it to, at the time, one of my best friends, he was a director at Starbucks, as an example. So my mentoring group, so he was at corporate office in Seattle. My mentoring group, we did a day at Starbucks, learning from these leaders at Starbucks. And basically, when Starbucks does a mentoring thing, they piece together a book, like a task book, and that you got to mentor with certain individuals at certain levels, and you got to meet certain things. And in the fire service, that is essentially a task book. That's just like, hey, do you want to be firefighter 1 or firefighter 2, or you want to be checked off to drive the engine? You got to go through this task book, and you got to do certain things. Guess what? You're going to probably talk to people that have that experience, and they're going to help you out. But the side of mentorship that I think is most important, where you get the value, is through the relationship. So when we develop the task books, or using the example of how we developed our mentor program back in mid 2000s, it was mentor focused, meaning that the mentor was seeking individuals to be a part of the program, the mentee, and was driving the focus. Where we found out that really mentorship, the most successful mentorship, is mentee focused, meaning the individual needs to seek out what they're trying to make change, and needs to seek out the individuals that can help them with that change, and that they can rely on them for the information and guidance. And again, this is relationship based, because I've known you for a while now on social media, but I wouldn't say, like, when we first met that we were best friends and we had a relationship. You could ask questions and I can give you answers to it. But over a period of time, where we're developing a relationship, sitting down, or you and I, if we were together, and we'd be able to address some big issues, because you pretty much don't just come to somebody that you've never met before and say, I've got this problem, and you're gonna vomit out the problem. That just doesn't happen. But through relationship, you're going to get that. And through the relationships, you're the mentor that you've selected, and that you are communicating with, they're probably going to be more apt to give you more information and help guide you when there is a relationship established. So, the idea that when, there's a lot of people that say, these are my mentors. And mentors, like we're just talking about, it's got different avenues. There are people that you read their material and you've implemented a lot of their stuff. So you say, that's a mentor of mine. But there are others that I guarantee you, they don't even know that they're my mentor. And I call them my mentor because of our relationship. I know I can call up Chief Ike, or I can, call up Corley Moore and Scott Thompson, all these. I know I can call these people with a problem, and I'm going to get no bullshit answer, and I'm going to, and they're going to be vested in me getting through it, versus I'm just going to give you an answer that I think would be the correct answer. And they're going to probably follow up. They're going to call you later and see how did that go. That is true mentorship. And so we try to piece together these big, and I've got like I said, we've got a leadership mentor program online, and in our online stuff, we don't have very many personal relationships, because it's just getting a group of firefighters together. The initial intent was to try to get everybody in a group, and we're going to, provide information and let the mentoring kind of go. But the reality is, we found, again, relationships. And what we're hoping out of Young Officers on Fire is that it gets people together, so it creates relationship, similar problems or similar departments where they're dealing with similar problems, and that somebody can then gain a mentor out of.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. And I think the breaking down informal and formal mentorship is extremely important, and then also having that conversation with your self-labeled mentor and letting them know that they're a mentor is extremely important as well, because if they don't know that they're your mentor, they can't necessarily take ownership in your development, and they maybe won't follow up. Like you said, I can walk up to you, never met you before, and say, hey, Rob, I'm looking at truck company operations and you can just give me a little spiel and I'm like, thanks, and walk away. Versus if you're my mentor, you could follow up and be like, how's this going on with your department? What's your delivery look like? Here's some other resources. Here's this guy's phone number. Talk to him. It's completely different. And I have yet to find a department, at least in my area, that is doing mentorship really well, at least formal. But there is there's an informal mentorship, but it's not. It's one of those things where we don't have an agreed upon fact that you're a mentor. It's just we try to look after one another.
What's the end result really is what it comes down to. Like in my former department, while we started a mentor program, and we were taking, basically we were a group of us company officers, and we had a large group of hire from a grant, a firefighter assistance grant, and they were just getting done with their probation. Their probation was pretty intense. And what happened in those days is that you get done with the probation, also you just fall off the face of the earth. I mean, like, you're no longer the focus. The probies are the focus. And so what we wanted to do is carry some intensity into the firefighter that gets done the probation and carry it on and see how that worked. And again, it was formal and it was more mentor focused, right? But what has resulted of that program is now we have a formal mentor program within our organization for the probies. So every recruit basically come out of recruit school, they're assigned a mentor, and it has to be somebody that was out of, that's a firefighter. It's never a company officer. The individual there's a group of that kind of pieces it all together. But the formal aspect of this mentor program is to make sure that the probie through their probation has somebody they can talk to, has somebody they can bounce stuff off of, has somebody that can help guide them, can help them with the information that they have to go through, the mounds of information they got to do. And is also for a company officer, allows for the company officer to be able to reach out to the mentor when a probie is struggling, help guide them. So that's a formal program, and it is successful. But again, it's different. It has a different focus or a different end result versus the informal mentoring, which is what I'm talking about with Chief Moore, Corley Moore, and with Chief Thompson and with Chief Ike, and with my uncle Jim, and these individuals, John Shepard, who's one of my best friends, who's the vice president at Marriott. That is absolutely different type of mentoring, and that's my informal one, and that's where I think I get the greatest value because, as you said, they're invested in me, and when I bring something up, guess what? They're following up to find out how things are going. They're going to give me more information.
Beautiful. Thanks, Rob, for addressing that for everybody. I mean, I'm on that personal mission of implementing a mentorship program in my department, and I find a lot of that extremely valuable. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, because of our technical difficulties, we got to wrap this one up because I'm supposed to be on Firefighter Nation live right now, and they're waiting on me. So I'm already pissing off Chief Rhodes, which is awesome. So for people to be able to contact you, how can they reach out to you?
Real simply, robfisher72@gmail.com, robfisher72 on all the socials. I don't go on X very often, but you can get me on Facebook. I'm all over the place on Facebook.
Nice. All right, everybody. So if you found value in this show, I'm going to have to get Rob on at another time because there's so many topics that we wanted to discuss, but I suck at managing my time. So it's completely my fault. Extreme ownership, I mentioned it. So it's all my fault. Find a way to make everything your fault. But that's going to wrap up episode number 30 with retired battalion chief Rob Fisher. Reach out to him. He's got a wealth of knowledge that he was only able to share a little bit on this episode. So reach out to him, and if you have any questions, utilize them. But until next week, we will catch you next time. See ya.